the way up to the year 1817, the Holte family was the owner of Aston Hall. Following that, it was acquired by the city of Birmingham, which continues to be the owner of the land even to this day. Prior to that, it was owned by a number of affluent families. Since that time, Aston Hall has been transformed into a museum and given a new function. Cannonball fire caused damage to a stairway at Aston Hall, which is still visible today, is evidence of the fact that the building has been the site of terror, murder, and assaults. Many people think that Aston Hall is one of the most haunted sites in Birmingham, England, despite the fact that it is a structure that is breathtakingly mesmerizing. Within its history, there are some dark and grisly legends that have led to this belief. Among the ghost stories that have been told about Aston Hall, the one that is most frequently mentioned is about the Grey Lady. A significant number of individuals are of the opinion that the Grey Woman could, in reality, be the daughter of Thomas Holte. It was after she had fallen in love with a guy who did not come from a noble background that her narrative began. The pair made preparations to secretly leave and elope, but Holte, who had previously arranged his daughter's marriage to another man, found out about their intentions and prevented them from carrying them out. According to the legend, Holte was so enraged that he locked his daughter up in a tiny chamber next to the servants' quarters for 16 years, causing her to gradually go insane. Nowadays, her spirit is still confined to wander the corridors of Aston Hall, and it is commonly seen by guests who come to see the building. The story of a young servant boy is at the core of yet another of Aston Hall's most melancholy ghost tales. The little kid was terrified of the possible consequences that may be imposed on him when he was suspected of stealing food from his master, Thomas Holte. He made the decision to take control of his own destiny and ended his own life by hanging himself from a rafter that was located inside the servants' quarters in the attic of the property that is now known as Dick's Garret. The ghost of this little kid has been seen by a number of people wandering throughout the corridors of Aston Hall, notably in the vicinity of the location where he passed away. It has been said that a ghostly trace was left behind by another death that occurred inside Aston Hall. Following the death of a previous chef in the kitchen by Thomas Holte, it is reported that the spirit of the prior cook continues to haunt the house. According to the allegations, Holte took a meath cleaver and used it to sever his chef's head in two after being so enraged by the poor performance of his cook. Subsequently, he would make use of his authority and influence in order to exonerate himself of the allegations of murder. There is a green woman who is claimed to be the last ghost that is said to haunt Aston Hall in Birmingham. She is said to have worked as a housekeeper at the estate in the past, according to recent rumors. Her spirit is invariably described as being dressed in a sophisticated, long green dress, and her apparition is often seen sitting down in a chair in either the housekeeper's living quarters or the Great Hall. Her attire is characterized as sophisticated and lengthy. Tower of London, magnificently on the north bank of the Thames in London, holds centuries of history. Today, beefeaters, yeoman warders, and the crown jewels, including the orb and scepter, are on display. The Tower of London, built by William the Conqueror in the 11th century to maintain his rule over England, became a royal residence and stronghold. It also hosted some of history's grisliest moments. Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, and Lady Jane Grey were executed during Tudor times. A mother beheaded for her son's misdeeds. Their uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, allegedly killed the two young princes in the Bloody Tower. Treason, murder, and execution. The Tower of London's stone walls have seen it all. No surprise, it's one of Britain's most haunted locales. Can the Tower of London's ghosts be those of the dead? Can anybody be sure? But these are the accounts of individuals who died horribly in the tower. See the 13. Tower of London, ghosts in all their gore. Guy Fawkes was imprisoned in the Tower of London for plotting to kill James IV in Parliament in 1605. Guy Fawkes was tortured at the Queen's house, perhaps on the White Tower rack. Few ghost tales are as creepy and terrible as this one. Anne Boleyn became Henry VIII's second wife when he divorced Catherine of Aragon and became the supreme head of the Church of England. Anne was arrested for adultery 3 years later and carried by barge to the Tower of London via Traitor's Gate. Anne was beheaded on Tower Green and buried in the Tower of London Parish Church, the Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula, St. Peter in chains. A soldier saw a light in the locked church 340 years later. After scaling a window to peek inside, the soldier saw a parade of knights and women headed by a decapitated Anne Boleyn. In 1471, Henry VI was assassinated at the altar in the king's private chapel, while imprisoned in the Wakefield Tower of the Tower of London. Henry's spirit reportedly haunts Wakefield Tower around midnight. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II gave Henry III lions or leopards in 1235 to keep in the Tower of London. Pumas, tigers, jackals, a French elephant, and a polar bear followed. Visitors to the tower flocked to witness the beasts, and bear baiting became popular in 16th and 17th century London. It seems this pastime's evils are being heard today. A bear spirit is supposed to materialize beyond the jewel room's entrance, maybe guarding the crown jewels. In 1816, a black bear apparition appeared near the Martin Tower. Elizabeth of Frisson and James. Imprisoned adventurer Sir Walter Raleigh 3 times in the Tower. An attempt at suicide occurred during his 13-year stay in the Bloody Tower. Sir Walter Raleigh was beheaded outside Westminster after his final Tower of London confinement in the Beauchamp Tower in 1603. Welsh Guardsman Johns guarded the Salt Tower in 1957. The shapeless body had the face of a young lady, maybe one of the numerous ladies who died in the Tower of London. Like Anne Boleyn, Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, was beheaded on Tower Green, west of the White Tower. Margaret Pole died aged 67. Henry VIII sentenced her to death for being Cardinal Pole's mother. Cardinal Pole was guilty of resisting Henry's self-proclaimed Church of England supremacy. In 1541, a wretched and blundering youth slashed at Margaret Pole's head and shoulders after failing to execute her cleanly with his axe, according to eyewitnesses. That timeless cry still rings in the towers. Beefeaters, the yeoman warders, guard the Tower of London. Captain J.D. Dundas saw a yeoman assault a whitish feminine figure with his bayonet in 1864. In the courtyard where Anne Boleyn was executed, this ghost arrived. King Edward, son of Henry V, died, making Lady Jane Grey queen. She was the shortest reigning English queen at 9 days. Edward chose Lady Jane Grey above his half-sister Mary as his successor in his final testament. As a pawn in royal power games, John Dudley arranged for 16-year-old Lady Jane Grey to marry his son, Lord Guilford Dudley. Following Edward's death on July 6, 1553, Protestant Lady Jane Grey became queen for a week until the council declared Catholic Mary England's legitimate ruler. Lady Jane Grey and her husband Dudley were murdered on Tower Green in 1554. Even now, Jane's white form haunts the Tower of London's battlements. The Tower of London's Arbella Stewart ghost is often seen. James the Friar imprisoned Arbella for marrying Lady Jane Grey's nephew, William Seymour, without permission. James arrested Arbella in the Tower, where she either refused to eat or was starved, fearing this union would threaten his rule. Perhaps Arbella's spirit haunts the Queen's house. 12-year-old Edward became King Edward V when his father, Edward IV, died. His uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, protected him. the Duke of Gloucester imprisoned Edward and his younger brother Richard in the Tower of London to seize the kingdom. Their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, sought refuge in Westminster Abbey. Gloucester became King Richard III after proclaiming Edward illegitimate. Edward and Richard were never seen again, perhaps slain by their uncle. 2 children's bones were recovered under a Tower of London stairway. Finally, the nameless thing is a terrifying apparition that pursues tower guards from the Thames Sally Portal entrance. First acquired, Blickling Hall was held by Sir John Fastolf of Caister. He became a wealthy individual as a result of the 100 Years' War, and his coat of arms is still on display in the hall to this day. As a result of his ownership, which lasted from 1380 to 1459, Blickling was acquired by the Boleyn family and served as the residence of Sir Thomas Boleyn and his wife Elizabeth from 1499 to 1505. A number of individuals were under the impression that their 2 children, George and Mary, were born in the hall. Anne Boleyn, the couple's most famous daughter, was born prior to the year 1505, and many people think that she was also born in the hall. Anne Boleyn would go on to become a queen in the future. The remains of the property that was held by the Boleyns were used as the foundation for the construction of the modern Blickling Hall that visitors see today. In 1616, Robert Lyminge, who was also the architect of the Hatfield House, created the construction that is now in place. The home was converted into the officers' mess of the Royal Air Force Olton during the Second World War when it was requisitioned by the military. Following that, the National Trust was given ownership of the home as well as the full land. Following the conclusion of the war, the home was released from its requisition and rented out to tenants until the year 1960. In 1962, it was eventually opened to the public and given the name Blickling Hall, Gardens and Park. Since then, it has been accessible to the public and has been in the care of the National Trust till the present day. Without a doubt, Anne Boleyn is the most well-known ghost resident of Blickling Hall. It has been said that she was seen arriving to the hall in a carriage, which was also driven by a headless horseman and 4 headless horses, while wearing all white and bearing her severed and dripping head. She moves gracefully through the halls and chambers, as well as the innumerable passageways, till the dawn rises. To learn more about Anne Boleyn's ghost, you may read more here. Thomas Boleyn, Anne's father, is another spectral resident of Blickling. He inhabits the house forever. His daughter's marriage to the King of England was arranged by him carefully. It is stated that he has lost both his daughter and his son as a result of his wrongdoings, and as a form of retribution, he is compelled to cross a dozen bridges before cockcrow for 1,000 years. He travels from Blickling to Aylsham, then to Berg, then to Buxton Coltishall, then to Mayton, then to Oxnead, and culminates his journey at Wroxham. He was likewise decapitated, and he carried his head between his arms. This was similar to what happened to his daughter. Additionally, it is stated that a flame, rather than blood, is expelled from his lips. According to legend, the headless apparitions of the Boleyns are not the only ghosts that are said to haunt this magnificent home. Blickling Hall is claimed to be haunted by Sir John Fastolf, the knight who lived in the 15th century and served as the inspiration for Shakespeare's Falstaff. Within the whole of the structure, he has been seen. In addition to this, there have been stories of the Grey Lady floating through walls. Abbey was established as a Cistercian abbey in 1278, last erected in medieval England and Wales. Over 250 years, monks cultivated the large estate. Monasteries were important in medieval civilization because they were centers of religion, study, and charity. Monasteries were affluent and politically powerful due to their huge land holdings. Cistercians, known as white monks, because their undyed robes were a Benedictine offshoot with stringent rituals. They valued austerity, prayer, and hard work. Cistercian monks lived in huge groups in distant, untamed locations and improved the land. Monks were plowmen, dairymen, shepherds, carpenters, and masons. The order became one of the wealthiest and most prominent due to its agricultural and industrial investments. The monks erected the Great Barn to store wool, fleece, cowhides, oats, wheat, and fruit from their orchards. The barn also kept tithes, a local levy that required farmers to provide 10% of their crops to the church. The Great Barn was utilized for various agricultural uses and remodeled for modern farming practices in the 1790s, when Henry VIII abolished monasteries and sequestered their money. The barn helped the war effort throughout Wabitakurwari. The Admiralty stored grain there, as seen by large inscriptions on the stone walls. The historic barn now hosts events, exhibits, and spectacular Christmas decorations. The dissolution of the monasteries under King Henry VIII dissolved Buckland Abbey's monastic status. Buckland was sold to Sir Richard Grenville in 1541, although his son Roger may have lived there. Roger perished aboard the Mary Rose, which sunk off Portsmouth in 1545, and never inherited Buckland. The estate passed to Roger's 21-year-old son, Sir Richard Grenville, the younger. He renovated the abbey, demolishing numerous monastic structures and turning the main church into a Tudor palace. Sir Richard loved sailing and made several early expeditions to colonize North America.
Hindi to worry, I'll be
The first Englishman to circle the world bought Buckland Abbey with some of his wealth. He became famous for defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588. Drake's career was varied and complicated. A woolen fabric shearman family had lived on the same farm in Crowndale, near Tavistock, for centuries when he was born in 1540. Drake, unlike his father, explored the sea in 1560, sailing aboard a slave ship owned by his kinsman, John Hawkins. Drake sailed again in 1562, 1564, and 1567, when he first commanded the Judith. Drake met several Atlantic inhabitants throughout his circumnavigation from 1577-1580. This comprised Europeans striving to dominate commerce and build colonies, liberated and enslaved Africans carried to North and South America, and indigenous Native Americans, whose local knowledge saved Drake and his crew. Drake encountered few slaves or indigenous persons whose names are known. Diego and Maria are outliers. Diego, a West African, served with Sir Francis Drake from 1572 until 1579. After being enslaved by the Spanish from West Africa, possibly Senegambia, to Panama, he became Drake's manservant and stayed in Plymouth before his last journey in 1579. Drake successfully attacked Spanish ports in Panama because to Diego's local expertise. We must mention Maria, an African lady of unknown background, many times in documents, or her name will be forgotten. Drake plundered cargo ships, galleons, and Central American and Mexican ports and cities throughout his circumnavigation. One ship belonged to Don Francisco de Zarate. The ship carried plenty of Philippine china, linen, taffeta, and silks. Drake grabbed the cargo but saved the ship. Drake received a gold and emerald brooch and enslaved people, including Maria, from Zarate as thanks. After Drake abandoned Maria on an Indonesian island, they stayed on Drake's ship until their return home. Drake seldom lived in Buckland Abbey. His final expedition was in 1595, constantly thinking about sea. Drake died of dysentery in 1596, when a sickness on his ship prevented him from attacking the Spanish at Panama. He had no offspring. Thus, his brother Thomas Drake owned Buckland Abbey. Drakes and their successors owned Buckland until 1946. The family alternated between Buckland and Devon's Nutwell Court. The 18th century agricultural improver William Marshall advised the family on farming improvements. The architect Samuel Pepys Cockerell remodeled elements of the structure and estate in the early 19th century. Lady Astor urged the National Trust to buy Buckland Abbey in 1946. Buckland Abbey, the home of Plymouth's legendary son, Sir Francis Drake, was a sacred emblem of our past and a national duty to preserve. Historic Watton-under-Edge is a tiny English hamlet around 40 minutes from Bristol, and its oldest structure, the ancient Ram Inn, is sometimes referred to be the most haunted property in Britain. There are a lot of peculiar people who have lived there, and the property has a curious history, so it's no wonder it's considered one of the most unusual in the area. There have been several paranormal investigations into the ancient Ram Inn. The 2008 season of Most Haunted was an in-depth investigation that used the use of surveillance cameras to record unexplained sounds and movements. An episode of Ghost Adventures also aired at the inn, detailing the host's interactions with EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, and other paranormal phenomena that have been reported there. The history of the ancient Ram Inn is full with intriguing lives that it has lived. Located on the ley lines, which lead straight to the enigmatic and ancient Stonehenge, the inn has been welcoming guests since 1145. However, before that, the land had been a pagan burial place that dated back millennia. Because of this link, urban legend has it that the peculiar paranormal events recorded on the site had something to do with its interesting history. Slaves, masons, and other laborers who built the adjacent St. Mary's Church lived in the present-day structure in 1145. Many believe that the diversion of streams on the property surrounding the church's location unleashed the evil spirits that had been used in local pagan ceremonies. The residence was inhabited by a priest after the departure of the masons and other workmen. The building later served as a public house and inn. Nevertheless, a newcomer purchased the inn in 1968 and made it his home. He had no intention of being involved in a paranormal investigation. In an effort to prevent its eventual demolition, John Humphreys purchased the property in the late 1960s. This inn is supposedly one of England's most haunted locations, since he had an encounter with the ghosts on his first night there. He asserts that he was pulled from his bed across the room by demonic powers that seized his arm. Ever since then, he has discovered artifacts on the inn's premises that point to ritual sacrifices and the worship of demons. What is even worse? The skeletal remains of youngsters, who he suspects were stabbed with daggers, have been discovered. Humphreys continued to live there despite the presence of ghosts. He stayed at the inn to protect it, even though his family had abandoned him. Humphreys endured the specter's return night after night for almost half a century, until his passing in late 2017. It is said that the inn-turned home is haunted by many spirits. One of the most well-known is the local witch who was beheaded in the 1500s, when the practice of witch hunts was at its height. The lady sought sanctuary at the ancient Ram Inn as she evaded what may have been a trial by officially sanctioned witch hunters. But she was apprehended not long after and set on fire. Naturally, her legend will endure. The chamber where she took refuge is now known as the Witch's Room, due to the persistent belief that her ghost still lingers there. Some of the dark and terrifying tales told about the millennia-old inn include the hanging of the daughter of the prior innkeeper in the attic, exorcisms, and the ghosts of children who were ritually killed. Paranormal researchers and the just inquisitive have captured images of these spectral orbs. Strange lights have frightened curious onlookers who are expecting to get a glimpse of the hereafter. According to legend, the inn's most spectral room is the bishop's room. According to urban legend, the rooms here are still inhabited by the souls of long-gone bishops. There are persistent reports of sightings of malevolent spirits, dark monks, and even the souls of these bishops at this location. A centurion from Rome has even been seen galloping past the walls on his way to harass some unassuming plumbers. The chamber that John Humphreys chose as his bedroom is said to be haunted by an incubus and a succubus, who frighten anybody who dares to remain there overnight. The first chamber guests see is the men's kitchen, which is said to be located on a pagan burial place and is said to be haunted by the eerie sounds of a baby crying. Even the attic has its share of ghosts. There seems to be a heavy sense of sorrow in the air as I climb up and crouch under the roof joists. Supposedly, in the early 1500s, a daughter of the previous owner was hanged in this same attic, and the sounds emanating from the area are those of her murder. Caroline Humphreys, granddaughter of John, slept in the attic. Those slumbering in the bishop's room below often heard what sounded like a large object being pulled over the floor above. A 7-foot-tall, black, ghostly figure, hostile toward males but partial to a certain kind of woman, haunts the 18th-century barn. As if to defend or safeguard something inside, this foreboding figure materializes at the doorway of the barn. 25. The Southworths built Samlesbury Hall. Sir Thomas Southworth shaped much of what we see today. Knighted for his wartime service against Scotland, he often broke the law. He also served as High Sheriff of Lancashire and a Royal Commissioner for Henry V, destroying Whalley Abbey. He restored the massive south range of the hall in brick, perhaps one of the earliest in Lancashire. His son Sir John inherited the land and hall. He was High Sheriff and an ecclesiastical commissioner who enforced religious regulations. In a period when Protestantism was the official faith, his job did not prevent him from being suspected of covertly practicing Catholic. He was punished, had estates taken, and was called to London to be persuaded of his theological faults. Finally, Sir John was imprisoned for his ideas in Manchester's New Fleet prison. After being pardoned, his stolen estates were restored. Despite this, he and his family practiced Catholicism secretly. In Sir John's latter years, local judge of the peace Richard Bretherton searched Samlesbury Hall for religious evidence. According to historical records, they found superstitious things, including papist books. A concealing hole by the Great Hall ceiling contained 2 candlesticks, an altar canopy, and 14 religious icons, perhaps for Mass. This may be one of the 3 priest holes the house possesses, which may be seen today. The Southworths sold their hall and land to Thomas Brattle in 1678 when their finances declined. The Brattle family never resided there, preferring Conishead Priory. The hall was rented to tenants. Over the following century, the hall was converted into tenements and neglected. Since its tenants were weavers and laborers, the absent landlords did nothing to prevent further damage. Preston New Route Turnpike intersected the south range of the hall in 1825 and is the principal route today. In 1833, the hall became the Brattle Arms Inn. This was a good spot on the new bustling highway. After adding stables and a coach house, the hall was damaged during conversion and repair. In 1845, George Webster may have added the big stone fireplace, upgraded the chapel, and removed woodwork for Conishead Priory at Samlesbury. Webster renovated Bank Hall near Bretherton. See our story. More ownership changes followed, and by 1852, a Swiss Pestalozzi school occupied the hall. Romanticism motivated the school's emphasis on head, heart, and hands. Joseph Harrison, a wealthy Blackburn Ironworks proprietor, bought Samlesbury again in 1862. He built the west end of the South Range and the entry hall's spectacular stairway. Cotton workers struck over a salary decrease in 1878, causing rioting. Many men were brought to the hall, 50 military with an officer, 20 police constables with an inspector. The house's destiny was uncertain at the start of the 20th century. After Joseph's son Henry sold the estate and hall in 1918, a company of Blackburn builders acquired it to destroy and construct new dwellings. In 1925, the Samlesbury Hall Trust bought the mansion to preserve it. The trust maintains the land and has grown, especially lately. Samlesbury has rich Tudor heritage. An entrance hall was erected around 1530 to greet visitors. The fireplace in this chamber may have had an Elizabethan priest hole that connected to the sewer and moat. Joseph Harrison built the spectacular staircase with a double-tailed mermaid. The chapel was originally independent, but linked to the main hall about 1530. Here is a large window from Whalley Abbey, shot by Thomas Southworth. The chapel's carved wooden screen, which separated worshippers from the altar, was moved to Conness Head Priory in 1821 and remains there. The chapel's gallery seats the Lord and his family, while the slaves pray below. The room hosts civil marriages nowadays. The 1400s Great Hall. The original design may have had an earth floor covered in rushes, a central hearth, and a thatched roof. In the 1500s, Thomas Southworth constructed the enormous bay window and fireplace. A big, adjustable wooden screen was at the north end of the chamber. The false minstrel's gallery above the south end has remnants. The hall was turned into the Brattle Arms Inn, and this odd feature includes bedsteads and other vintage furnishings. The upstairs long gallery displays the case, vestments, and equipment for a priest to secretly perform a mass in the residence. This intriguing and appropriate collection of artifacts shows how such behavior plagued John Southworth and his family. A replica Victorian kitchen, a World War I room with many artifacts and anecdotes, and a timeline room detailing the hall's history and current events are all interesting. Samlesbury Hall contains an art gallery, cafe, restaurant, large store, and antiques. Small goat, rabbit, hen, and bee farms and 2 artist studios are on the grounds. Visitors may now freely roam the hall since 2015.